Good evening, St. Charles Borromeo. Charles DeReuil here. I hope you guys are having a wonderful beginning to the season of Lent. This evening, at the request of Father Priscilla, I'm going to offer a short tour of the church Santa Sabina. Now, Santa Sabina is one of the Roman basilicas, and it is one of the station churches. Now, the station churches are churches that are assigned to each day of Lent. This tradition comes from the practice of the early church, where the Holy Father would travel to a different church each day of Lent to celebrate Mass. Now, over time, this practice fell out of use, but it was revived by Pope John the 23rd. Now, the practice did not fully revive in that the popes don't go to each of these churches every day. However, Santa Sabina is one of the unique station churches because since John the 23rd, the popes have come here each Ash Wednesday to celebrate Mass. Now, obviously, given the circumstances with Pope Francis's health this year, he did not come to Santa Sabina to offer Mass on Ash Wednesday, but our college still went out there to celebrate Mass and to begin the Lenten season. So while I was out there, I filmed a little bit of the church and hopefully provide at least somewhat interesting tour of the Basilica. Now, I'm not the only one who is going to be offering these tours. Father Joe Wappis, Father Michael Maloney, Father Tony Lusfardi, Father Colin Jones, all are going to produce videos this Lent that will introduce you to one of the basilicas of Rome. And so I think hopefully this will be a good way for the St. Charles contingent that is over in the city of Rome. It will be a good way for them to stay connected to all you back in the Twin Cities. Now, part of the thought behind doing this video series was the advice that the Holy Father gave us that kind of is, in a way, kind of dictating this Jubilee. And that is the Holy Father wanted to remind all Christians that we are pilgrims, that we are on a journey to heaven, and that this earth is not our final destination. And now, one good way we can remind ourselves of this pilgrimage aspect of the church is by going on pilgrimage. I would recommend for you all, if you haven't yet, make a small pilgrimage to the Cathedral of St. Paul to visit the holy doors there. One small pilgrimage we do here in Rome is that every day we go to these station churches. And so we thought to help you guys kind of enter into this pilgrimage aspect of the Jubilee, we'd bring you along on some of our station churches and give you a brief tour and introduction to the church. Now, before I begin, I have to offer a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not much of a videographer, so unfortunately, you might get a couple shots of my thumb and of my pointer finger as I'm trying to film various aspects of the church. So you'll have to forgive me. Hopefully it's not too much of a pain as you're watching this. I don't promise any kind of, Oscar-worthy content here, but hopefully it'll give you a good introduction to the church, and it'll help you enter well into the season of Lent. I look forward to seeing you guys again this summer and being back at St. Charles Borromeo. Please keep me in your prayers this Lenten season and know of my prayers for you. And with that, without any further ado, I will present to you the Station Church of Santa Sabina.
The route from the North American College to Santa Sabina follows the Tiber River almost the entire way. This walk is generally one of my favorite parts of the station churches, in part because it's one of the few times we actually get to see the streets of Rome quiet and still. The Aventine Hill, which is where Santa Sabina is located, is just past the Tiber Island, which is a large island in the center of the Tiber River. You can see it barely in front of us now. It's just to the right of that dome, which is the Synagogue of Rome. Here we are, the rapids, which are just past Tiber Island, and this is at the base of the Aventine Hill. These rapids played an important role in the history of the Aventine Hill because they marked the furthest point upriver the Roman ships could go. As a result, the Aventine became the warehouse district of Rome. All the ships that were coming from the Mediterranean Sea would stop at the Aventine Hill and unload all their cargo. By the 3rd and 4th century, the Aventine began to be developed into a residential neighborhood as well. That's the origin of the Church of Santa Sabina. As the camera's panning now, we're directly looking at the Aventine Hill. You can't tell it's a hill really from this shot, but pretty soon you'll see that it does have a significant ascent. These steps mark the beginning of the Aventine Hill, and as we're climbing up these steps with a couple fellow pilgrims going to Ash Wednesday Mass, we're approaching where used to stand the villa of Marcella. Marcella was an ancient Roman woman who owned a villa here that was actually quite important for the early Christians in Rome. Saint Jerome, the 4th century biblical scholar, stayed here actually before he left for the Holy Land. Now, at the turn of the 4th and 5th century, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome and destroyed almost all of the mansions on the Aventine Hill. It was in the aftermath of this destruction that the Christians decided to build a basilica on the site of Marcella's old villa. The basilica was named after Santa Sabina because of Marcella's devotion to the saint. We're now standing inside of the basilica. One of the unique features of this church is that it's probably the best representation of what early basilicas looked like in the time of Constantine. Those basilicas were defined by a long nave with flanking side aisles. Part of what makes this basilica such a great representation of the period is the simplicity, which I think is pretty fitting for this season of Lent. Two features of the church which characterize this simplicity are the church's ceiling and its windows. The ceiling, as you probably could tell, is pretty bare in the center, and on the side aisles you can still see the wooden rafters, which was typical of the original Roman basilicas built at the time of Constantine. The other feature are these windows, which I'll talk about later. But before we do that, I'd like to show you a tomb which introduces us to the season well. This is the tomb of a cardinal, Cardinal Auxias, and it has the inscription Ut moriens viveret vixit ut moriturus, meaning that dying he might live, he lived as one about to die. Living as one about to die is one of the reasons why we do things like prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It prepares us for death. The camera is now going to pan up from the 8th century choir stall to a 19th century fresco, one of the latest additions to the church. This is also where you can get a good view at the windows I'd mentioned earlier. Part of what makes these windows so unique is that they aren't actually made of glass, they're made of finely cut alabaster so that they're translucent. This is also a good time to bring up the later history of the church, starting in the Middle Ages, which is when it became a Dominican church, which it still is today. This window that I'm zooming in on goes into the convent, and it was used by the Dominican friars to watch St. Dominic pray his nocturnal hours during the night. There have been a lot of Dominican saints who lived in this convent here, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Dominic, and Pope St. Pius V. What we're approaching here is, if you remember, I had mentioned earlier that the Aventine was the warehouse district of Rome, and this stone here was used as a weight to measure grain. St. Dominic, who's depicted in this icon here, would use this stone as his pillow when he was praying in the church at night. We're now coming up on the left side of the church to look at the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, which is where the tabernacle is. But it also happens to have a painting of St. Dominic receiving the rosary and St. Catherine of Siena receiving a wedding ring from the child Jesus. This painting is done by the Renaissance painter Sassoferrato. I've attached here a higher resolution image of the painting so you can appreciate it a little better. Now, after looking at this painting, we'll move to the outer portico that we're now walking through. And there are two things we'd come to see here. One is this fresco that shows the Virgin Mary with the child Jesus, and has a couple other saints and patrons of the church depicted in it. But the real reason we'd come is for these doors. Now you'll notice on these doors that the lower panels don't have any of the relief carvings that the upper panels have. And this is because Napoleon actually stole them while he was in Rome, which doesn't really help the stereotype of Napoleon being short. Now I'm zooming up to the upper left portion of the door, and that's because what makes this door so significant is that it has the first depiction of the crucifixion in art, another reason why this church is so fitting for the Lenten season. You'll see here it's a pretty rough image, but nonetheless it's pretty significant because up until this point the only depictions of the crucifixion we had were actually blasphemous depictions. For example, this piece of graffiti here was found on the Palatine Hill and shows Jesus with a donkey head and is making fun of Christians. So for that reason, this depiction of the crucifixion is really significant. We're now entering the orange garden, which stands just outside Santa Sabina. Now, there's a tradition for the Dominicans that they plant oranges wherever they establish a new convent. Since Santa Sabina is the general headquarters of the entire Dominican order, it has quite the orange garden right outside. The other nice feature about this garden, besides the beautiful view it has, is that it gives us a good opportunity to see the outside of the basilica. As I'm panning over, you'll be able to see that Santa Sabina is also a pretty simple exterior. You also have a better opportunity to see those windows I had talked about, and you can see just the teeny space they leave for those panes of alabaster. We're walking towards the edge of the Aventine Hill, which overlooks the Tiber River, as you can see is facing directly in the direction of St. Peter's, which makes this one of the most beautiful views in the entire city of Rome. We'll now walk to a teeny little balcony that looks over the city of Rome, so you can kind of get an appreciation for where we've been. If you look straight through the trees, you can just barely make out the dome of St. Peter's. It's in the bottom left of the screen. And as you're turning, you can see the Altar della Patria, which is the big structure to the right in white. And we're turning towards the Dome of St. Peter's, which you now can see just under that branch. And that's basically where we walked from. So it was a good 35-minute walk to come up here. And by the time you finish the station mass, this is when I'm filming, this is right after the station mass, the city of Rome is just waking up, and Lent has officially begun.
I hope you guys enjoyed this tour of Santa Sabina. You can look forward to a video from Father Joe Wappis next Friday. Have a good rest of your season of Lent, and I look forward to seeing you guys back in the cities this summer. God bless.